Welcome to Executive Access, your home for real talk with industry leaders. I am your host, Jamie Tazi. Today, I am speaking with Tony DiBenedetto, founder and CEO of Think Big for Kids and CEO of Appspace. Tony is a tech exec, an entrepreneur, and a philanthropist. He started TriBridge in 1998, grew it to over 850 employees before he sold it. He also won numerous awards, including Philanthropist of the Year by the Tampa Bay Business and Wealth magazine. We discussed his entrepreneurial journey and how his leadership had to evolve as the company grew. We spoke a lot about Think Big for Kids, which is a nonprofit organization he founded to break the cycle of poverty amongst teens and young adults by preparing them to excel in the workforce. We then talked about the important role that businesses and business leaders can do in their community to give back. And Tony is just a leader that I deeply, deeply respect, a person that doesn't just find the problems, he rolls up his sleeves to fix them. I was incredibly inspired during this conversation, and I believe you will be as well. Let's dive in. Tony, there's so much I want to talk to you about, your entrepreneurship, your Think Bigger for Kids foundation that you started. But first, I want to start with the old growth mindset question, because I know you are always moving and shaking. So what are you doing these days to personally or professionally grow?
It's I do have a lot of different things going on. So one of the challenges for me is how to be present in the moment. I'm on a bunch of boards. I run a company, and then I have a foundation, and I have my family. So how do you stay present? And so the last couple of years, but really this year, maybe last year, is just really getting into meditation,
Oh,
and just using that as a way to have kind of the tools to be present in a meeting and not be thinking about all those other things that you have going on. It's not the thing a lot of people talk about, but for me, it's been a really good way to participate better. And actually, in a weird way, me as being fairly social and talkative, but meditation has made me more quiet and listen more, which has helped me be present as well, which sounds counterintuitive, but for me, that's kind of worked a little bit. So I think that's probably the one thing that I probably didn't imagine would be part of my kind of growth and growing kind of plan. So I'd say that's the biggest thing. And then, because I'm running a different kind of company, it's a global software company focused on employee experience. I've probably read more articles about return to office and employee empowerment and communicating with employees and how to make that workplace experience. Like I thought I knew some things before. One funny observation, maybe not even funny, only funny because I'm talking to you, is really Microsoft's been in the employee experience business for like 35 years,
sure.
right? And I never thought of them that way, but really they've been thinking about those topics and how to make that employee journey more smooth and helps you with retention and all those things. So those two things, both on the personal end, I think meditation, and then just really going deep on this idea of employee empowerment, employee experience, and how to get the most out of those teams. Which again, I thought I knew a lot about it, but I have never thought about it through the technology side. And now, of course, that's what our company does. So I'm learning a lot.
Those are two great things. On the meditation front, do you have a practice where you do a small meditation before each meeting, or is it something not that deliberate?
I do multiple things. So I'm on one of those apps, Insight Timer's the one I use. So I have a bunch of favorites that I do, usually either one in the morning or one at night to set the tone.
Hmm,
So if I remember in the morning, it's great because I can walk into that first meeting. So I did one this morning knowing I was going to be on with you. I wanted to be Zen like, or
nice.
I do it at the end of the day because my head's just too full and you're kind of clearing it out. If I'm about to do something big, like yesterday, we were doing strategy for Think Big for Kids, and I was doing kind of a pretty long kind of keynote for vision down the road, and then what does 25 look like, and just kind of sharing some ideas. I had to get in the right mindset. So right before I went in there, I did just a 2-minute exercise, so really light, not a 15 or 20. And it just got me, kind of down a little bit because I was coming from a meeting, and how we all bounce meeting to
Oh,
meeting.
sure.
And so I do use that little technique, and it's just a breathing technique. Just follow your breath. So real simple. meditation with not guided or anything. So that's kind of the tools.
Well, I had a phenomenal leader I worked with, Allison Watson. You might remember Allison, who at
Sure.
one point was starting every one of her team meetings with a guided meditation in Michael Gervais's voice, like a breathing for 2 minutes. And the first time I experienced it, I was like, what are we doing? This is so strange.
Sure,
But you know
sure.
what? You do. You run from meeting to meeting. You run around, and it was it was a total centering thing. That's a good reminder of me to reconnect with those things because I'm a big believer. And then the workplace stuff. Every CEO that I work with now is grappling with that issue, the right balance of bringing people back into the office or not, and supporting people and the new lifestyle employee contracts that we have with employees. So great to see you
Yeah.
leading and on the forefront of that.
Trying.
Yeah. Well, so one thing that I have always admired, but I think, in the past 5 years working with founders, a few founders and on boards, is my deep appreciation and admiration for founders and entrepreneurship. And I consider you a serial founder, whether it be a few smaller organizations that you founded, I think even before maybe you graduated college, or you can correct me, or TriBridge, of course, which you grew to a very large organization, and now Think Big for Kids. What is it that inspired you to be this sort of serial founder?
Well, two funny things. It wasn't in college, but it
Okay.
was, unless you count my paper route at 13, but it
Let's
was
count it.
after college. Yeah, that's true. Early 20s, and I was working at Anderson, and I started a restaurant and then a trucking
Okay.
services company. But neither of them did real well, so it was all good learning and all that kind of stuff. The restaurant clearly didn't do very well. I didn't even know when I was younger that word was a foreign word. I don't think people use that word as much when I was that age. So to me, it was just about, I had a real rebellious streak. A little bit of my personal background. I didn't grow up traditionally with maybe the same structure as a lot of people. And so I had this rebellious mindset, it could have gone either way. Like one way could have been do bad things or rebel against the government or whatever. But the other way could just be, fix things, right? So I kept
Mm.
seeing business models or businesses, even as a young person. And I always had this real strong inner voice telling me, oh, you could do that better. And sometimes I'd write it down. And I'm a big believer of kind of visioning things, writing them down, and then eventually you pick it back up and you do something with it. Like when I was in college, I was on a beach one day and I was just, again, should be doing other things. And I had a little notebook with me. I was by myself and I started writing a database diagram for an online, which this was 1983,
Mm.
1984. And I was writing this little online stock trader because I was interested in stocks at the time. It's kind of a new thing for me. And I was like, why are we not doing this in a database? Why can't I trade my own stocks? And there wasn't even a lot of personal computers. There's the Apple II, I think the IBM, not even the PS, is the early IBM personal computer. The IBM personal computer. So I was just, my mind's always is looking to make things better,
Mm.
which there's a downside to that too, because you're constantly doing it instead of just kind of accepting the way things are. Like I'm constantly trying to fix things. So I think it's more that than I thought I was going to be an entrepreneur. But once you do it, Jamie, there's a freedom to it. And if you're successful, it rewards you. Like your brain goes, oh, you did make it better. You did create that value prop. You did make that happen. Everybody thinks you think about the money, and I'm sure people do, but it's really about the accomplishment. Like you had this idea and it came to fruition and you saw it play out. And it's not even that you were right, it's like you made it right. In other words, because
Yeah.
most things you start off with a solution and it's never the right one. And then you kind of ideate and iterate on it. And then by the time you're at the end of that, the customers kind of tell you whether you're right. And so that process, because you get to create it and you start from the beginning and then you see it play out, is so rewarding. It makes you do it again. So the serial part comes from, it's almost a drug to me. Like it's almost like, wow, like I want to keep doing this. Now I'm at an age and an experience level where I like helping other people do it. So I sit on boards or invest in small tech companies that do it. And I still get the charge. So that's kind of cool, even if it's not my idea. Um, I still get that same feeling with kind of less of the, the horrors of going through it and the failures that you go through, when you're doing these things.
I think I can relate to that a little bit. Even when I was working at a very large organization, I was doing some more, I don't know, incubation type of business work. And for me, it was once you do something hard and you make mistakes and you fail, but you realize nothing is deadly, right? Like, and you can keep moving on, and then you achieve something. All of a sudden, it unlocks something. At least it did in me that said, you know what? Anything is possible. I literally walk through life thinking that anything is possible. We just have to decide what we're going to spend our time working on. And when you achieve some success at something and you start to believe, well, that's just a problem. No matter how big the problem is, we can solve it. It just sort of unlocks something in you that is really special. So I think I can
Yeah.
at least understand where you're coming from emotionally from that point of view.
Oh, I think you have it because you ran different divisions at Microsoft that were more entrepreneurial than big Microsoft. Like the Dynamics business was new and it wasn't
Sure.
playing by all the same rules, and you guys had to make stuff up and do your first this deal or the first that deal. So I do think you did experience it inside a big company. But what you're talking about is the confidence, right? You
Yes.
you gained confidence that said push forward, and now you've carried that with you everywhere. And again, witnessing your career for a pretty long time, I saw that, and that's why you got bigger jobs and you did well at them and all that. So I think there's a drug to that too, right? There's a feeling of, oh, I can do whatever. And it's probably dangerous to some level because I hike and do stuff, and I'll be like, oh, I can do that too, even though I shouldn't be as confident on the mountain or skiing or whatever than I am in business. But that does carry forward in those things, and I sometimes get hurt. I
We could
take
sidetrack on physical
chances.
because I have two back surgeries that prove
Oh
that
wow!
point of what you just made. You know, where your
Ouch!
mental toughness is somehow a little stronger than your physical prowess, and
Exactly.
I guess that's a blessing and a curse. So, but let's talk
Yeah.
about TriBridge. So you started TriBridge with two co-founders. You went from a startup to, by the time you sold that organization, to almost 1,000 employees, a large organization. And from a leadership perspective, I'm really curious about and you ran it the entire time. You were the CEO the entire time. How did you almost like what was required at different stages of that journey, and how did you maybe reinvent yourself is too strong, but how did you continue to grow and be the relevant leader for that entire trajectory of that business?
Yeah, it's probably more challenging than it sounds because there are people I've run into that are really good at startup
Sure.
phase, and there's people really good at the growth stage and really good at the bigger stage. I'm not sure I was great at any of them, but I was great at morphing, like you're saying.
All right.
Um, and I kind of recognized early on that it was going to be, and this, so taking the improvement idea we talked about earlier, and I kind of applied it to myself and said, man, for this to happen, you're going to have to grow and change. So I was, did a lot of strategy work on the front end, and I would evaluate and look at myself and say, well, what can I do that's different because the company has different needs. And sometimes that was in my wheelhouse and I could do it. And then sometimes I couldn't do it. So I'd bring in other people or other skills. And the thing you learn if you want to grow in any role, again, it could be Microsoft or your own company, is you have to build a great team. You had several guests on there talk about bringing talent in. So you got to be able to bring talent in, and then you got to trust the talent and build a culture and kind of an employee experience that allows them to flourish. And the more you do that, the more that frees you up to grow into the bigger company with the company. Steve Turk, who you know and worked with a
Love
lot,
Steve.
he did and I do too. He's one of the best persons I've ever met in business. But he'd always say, "But we've never done it." And I so his take was, "We haven't done it, therefore either we shouldn't do it or we should find someone else." And I'd always be like, "Yeah, but maybe we have just a different idea, and I don't care that we haven't done it before. Let's do it anyway." So I was always very comfortable with not being the expert in learning. And then I had balance, like Brian and Steve saying, no, sometimes you got to have an expert. And so finding that rhythm and knowing yourself, knowing your bugaboos and things that you're not good at, which is hard. Like when you're younger, I was 32 when I started TriBridge. When you're younger, your confidence, like you were saying earlier, your mental confidence is greater than your abilities, right? As you get older, maybe they even out to some degree, but you certainly get better on your skills and your experience and you can leverage it. And so maybe there's a benefit to being a little bit younger because you take more chances and do things, as long as you're willing to kind of grow along with the role. So I got coaching. I was in a CEO peer group that was phenomenal. There's 8 of us. We all started sub 10 million, and I think 5 of us grew companies over 100 million in that group. Um, I think I was humbled pretty quick in life. And so, Brian Deming, who's one of my partners, he's
Yep.
like one of the smartest guys in the world, and I partnered with
He's
him.
great.
Yeah. So most meetings I was in with him, I knew I wasn't the smartest guy. So I got comfortable with that really quickly, which means I was comfortable hiring really smart people to do jobs that needed to be done. And I hire them at a high level versus sometimes CEOs are not comfortable with that. And so they don't bring the best team in. And then cultivating, and trust is probably something I got to really quick because I wanted to grow. I was ambitious and I wanted the company to grow, and I was thinking big and think big for kids. And we use think big a lot inside of TriBridge. I noticed Sig in his episode talked about thinking big ideas. I totally loved that episode and
Thanks.
loved where you guys went with that, because a lot of people constrain businesses or their personal life based on what they think. Like, I can't hike that mountain, I can't run that marathon, I can't run that block, whatever it is, until you do it and start breaking the rules, right? Which entrepreneurs do a lot, and saying, but what if we did, what if we, instead of having a printer and a camera and all this, put everything on a phone? That seemed like a crazy idea 25 years ago. Yet here we are, and it does everything for us, right? We have this thing. And so you had to be that type of thinker, I think, to run a company where you're kind of breaking the rules and thinking big beyond the limitations that we see. And so, because of, again, being around great people like Brian, trying to set the culture tone, and then you kind of get lucky a little, I think, that I did evolve with it and didn't mess it up. And, I made so many mistakes, Jamie, along the way. I was too aggressive sometimes. I was not aggressive these times. I was too direct these times. I was not direct. So all of that happened, but it never kind of brought me down. Like, I was always like, hey, that's just part of the journey. And I always thought of business as very organic, and it's not something you can read. Like, sometimes there is a kind of a wave to it. It's not, we always look at graphs and these real straight lines. Like, you have more of this and it goes like this. And they're zigzaggy, as you know, like, it's all
Sure.
zigzaggy. The trend needs to look like that chart. But the actual day to day and the learning and all that's very up and down. As long as you have 2 good days to one bad day, then you're kind of making good progress. And so I don't know. I don't know if I answered your question.
You totally did. There's a lot you said in there. And one of the things that sticks out a lot to me is this idea of balance and who you surround yourself with, and being comfortable and confident enough to put people around you and to create people around you who bring something different than you to the table, that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. And my sense of you and my experience of you is you could be the guy generally who has a lot of the big ideas, that is pushing people to think bigger and broader, and to have people around you that are saying, well, yes, and, we need to, think about these other operational things. And so people that were making good balance to you, I think is, as I reflect on my leadership, I thank goodness for Connor Marston and Stacey Hess and Dave Ramboli, and the list goes on and on. People who were
Absolutely.
a little bit different than me. So I love all of that. And as you moved into, so you took over, you were on the board of Appspace and then became the CEO at some point, which was already an established organization, right? A pretty large established organization. What was similar in terms of the leadership that you needed to bring to an established organization, and what was different than the organizations that you started and grew with?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's so different when you're evolving with it, when you're in it and you're kind of part of it and you're the founder or one of the founders. So much of your personality early on is in the business and then
Sure.
comes out. Coming to Appspace, it wasn't my baby. And I actually didn't really understand the space, hence my lots of reading and stuff. But I thought it was simpler from the outside looking in than it really was. So the thing that attracted me, the two things that attracted me the most about being on the board and then even taking the CEO role, was there was a really good culture here. Even though it was a global company, there was a lot of camaraderie. And it felt like a startup, even though it clearly was not. And so I walked into a really good culture. And then I did get a number, as I was on the board, a number of people that I worked with before came from TriBridge to Appspace. So there's some familiarity with some of the leadership. So that made it a little bit easier. But I approached it really a lot different, to your point, in that I knew there was like almost a consulting project at first. I was looking at it and going, here's what's good, here's what's not good. So I was almost doing a SWOT the day I came in, even at the board level. And I was helping coach the CEO, and then he decided to leave, and then I took over. But I even did a SWOT then, like, what am I going to do different? And I feel like more like I'm adding little pieces, complementary pieces, versus being at the center of things. I felt more at TriBridge, mostly because I probably didn't know any better, that in the beginning I was more at the center, and over time I was complementary. Where here I just started complementary. I'm like, they were really good at this, so let that be. And then this is the part we're really not good at, and like bring in stuff. So it was a little bit more clinical. That's probably the wrong word, but a little bit more analytical, and a lot less emotional. A lot less emotional because it wasn't as connected. The other thing that connected me, though, is so there's the culture of the company, but the second thing is what they did. Once I figured out this wasn't about just communicating a message and collaboration, it's actually about people. And I really loved coaching people. I know you do too, which is why your new business. And I love that. And so I'm thinking, oh, we're really helping other companies make it better for their employees and that experience. And so they're trying to keep people and make that experience really cool. And I'm like, oh, so not only am I doing this for the company I'm in, I'm actually doing it for all of our customers. And so that really attracted me as well. And so I think I just took a very different approach. And also, I do less and talk less. But I'm higher level here than I was at TriBridge. Like I knew in TriBridge, I probably knew every little nuance of it because you felt like you grew in it. So I was in it. And here I feel more like I can see it from afar at times, which probably helps me. So I actually think I'm better at my job now than I was back then. And I do think it's easier as you get older and more experienced. Like every problem now, I've seen it between the boards I'm on and the companies I've started. I feel like I've seen each problem 100 times. So to apply something, it doesn't always work, but to apply something feels very comfortable. That confidence you talked about, where whatever the problem is, we're gonna fix it. So I think that's been good for the company too, right?
I think sometimes that beginner's mindset where you don't know the space as well as, of course, the space you in creating TriBridge just enables you to be like, okay, like we just need to simplify this. What are we really here to do? And it's about helping people. It's about creating value for organizations because people is what, drives those organizations. And my guess, I don't know this for sure, but my guess would be you being able to find that authentic connection and to be able to convey that to people within the organization. I'm just going to bet created an energy in the organization where they're like, oh yeah, we're not here to sell collaboration and software. We're here to help employees love their jobs, or whatever the tagline you came up with, which is, my guess is you probably energized and brought a lot of energy to the team.
I think I brought attention to that. We didn't have those terms in the company. So, you don't want to ever take credit for anything, period. But I do think I put a lot of energy around that. I totally agree. And I think I did see it from a completely different angle. We were thinking more about like the machines we were connecting to versus the people we were connecting to. And I definitely had the people mindset because I didn't know any better, to exactly your point, which, is a good reminder for all of us to get that different type of thinking when people think about diversity. When I think about diversity, I want diversity in thinking. And so you want to bring people to the table that can think differently. And I do think I was one of those things here, but I've probably been here too long now to be kind of an outsider, but
I think it's amazing. I love all the different types of roles that you bring and how they sort of stack on each other. I'd love to shift and talk about your philanthropic work. I'd love to hear the story behind Think Big for Kids and how you founded that. But I read a recent article you're an FSU grad. You were like an FSU College of Business Hall of Famer. I'm going to guess that like you eat, breathe, sleep, FSU, which is amazing. But in the article, you said that, gratitude is where a lot of your motivation for all the philanthropic work you do, and certainly for starting Think Big for Kids. And I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
No, it's good research on your part. Yeah, I grew up in a kind of different background. My mom was a young drug addict, so I got given up pretty early in life, and to my grandparents, and then they passed when I was pretty young. So I wound up living with a lot of friends and people, and my journey from like 12 years old to 22 was just filled with just a lot of diversity.
Hmm.
Where I lived and race, different people of different race and religion and backgrounds raised me, and I was like almost like a community kid, I guess, to some degree. And so I always knew, as a result of all this fortune I had as a kid, that I felt the gratitude, and it felt like I kind of wanted to pay it, not kind of wanted to pay it back. I remember saying at the end of high school, like, I'm going to pay all these people back.
Wow.
And it stuck with me. After I graduated from college and I went to work for Arthur Andersen, a consulting group, they were really focused on community involvement. And so that was a good vehicle for me to learn, like the United Way and all these organizations. And so I got to know the Boys and Girls Clubs over the years, and I saw kids that were like me. And the more they got to know me and I was doing things with them over the years, they were asking me to tell my story to kids because they thought it was motivating. So I started just in Tampa doing that. And then the word got out, and I started doing it in Dallas and New Hampshire and Atlanta. And so, because we had offices in Tribridge everywhere. So I found myself in front of all these kids that felt and looked like me. And I was telling a much more brutal story than I would tell on a podcast, just about what it was like growing up and the drugs and the violence and, what I did, and trying to encourage kids to like take responsibility for the outcome, because no one else is going to care about you if you don't care about your own outcome. And so here are some things you can do. We talked about education, not necessarily college, but education, and how to have a plan and connect. So I was doing that for a long time, like 10 or 15 years. And one day I was doing this in South Florida in Broward County. It was like 400 kids. And, you get to a point where you do something and you're super confident, like we were talking about. And I got on autopilot. This is my 50th one of these or whatever. And I was rolling. I thought I was. I was looking out in the audience, and I had a couple parents in the audience. It was like, I don't know, 120 kids or so. And in my mind, I was connecting, but as I really analyzed it, I was connecting with like 10% of the kids that were motivated like I was. And so I stopped in mid of my rote speech and fiery. I was super fiery doing this. And I started asking the kids questions like, how many kids in here are going to, do any kind of education after high school? Like 3 kids raised their hand. How many kids have heard of the SAT? Like 6 kids raised their hand. How many kids know what they want to do? How many kids? I was just asking questions.
Sure.
And I was so dejected. I was like, wow, most of the kids are not super connected. Most of the kids don't know what to do. Most of the kids don't have a plan. And I had a lot of success giving back in different programs, but it was the 10% of the kids that were verbose or confident. Like I was a confident
Sure.
talker as a kid, which allowed people to grab me and say, let's help that kid. What about the shy kid? What about the B student? What about the C student? So I literally felt like a failure, like talking about feeling down while you're doing something good. I was supposed to be there doing something good. I flew home on this little terrible plane. It's super hot. And I'm like, I suck. I've got to do something I got to fix this.
Fix
right?
it. Exactly.
And so Jenny Tribby was our PR person for Tribridge at the time. I said, Jenny, for the next 2 days, we're locking in my office. I had writable kind of walls at the time. I said, we're coming up with a program. And her and I sat there. I'm sure I smelled we were eating Chinese food or whatever it was. And we were writing on the walls, and we wrote the program out, and we pitched it to the Boys and Girls Club. And just serendipity, I guess, the head, Jim Clark, who's the head of the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club nationally, was in town. And the local Tampa guy goes, why don't you pitch him? And I went to lunch with him. And he said, this sounds incredible. Pilot it in Tampa, and then we'll back you and get you connected to Boys and Girls Clubs, because that's a way for us to be around kids in need. And so that's really been, that partnership really got us started. And the rest is kind of history. We've to date served about 8,000 kids in about 6 locations across the U.S. And we're making a difference. The name of the organization is Think Big for Kids. Our whole mission is break the cycle of poverty And we do that with these three pillars. We help kids that start in middle school into their first job. We help them with everything from trying to figure out what they should be doing. We give them a mentor. We get them internships and scholarships and help them get that first job. We do a lot more in between. We have a really, really high success rate. And we got kids that have graduated and become EMTs and contractors and plumbers and doctors and tech people. And it's been an amazing kind of journey. So we're super excited about that.
It's really exciting. When I first learned about your story, I was like, wow, so Tony was one of the lucky ones that was somehow able to get a lot of support from people and to be able, and I think we live in the greatest country in the world that enables that to happen. But the way you're describing it makes a lot of sense to me too. There was something about your inherent makeup, your, confidence, your outspokenness that really speaks to the way I see people in general. Generally, when I think that when people know that there's a need or see that there's a need, they want to help, but they just don't know how, or they don't prioritize it, or whatever the case may be. I was at Boston College and I signed up for some community service. And so every week I would, in the snow, walk, get on the T and then walk a mile to the school, this underserved school. And my job was to kind of mentor kids or play with them or whatever, 10-year-olds. And I went home for Christmas and I was like, nobody cares that I'm there, whatever. I come back from school and I almost didn't go. I'm like, nobody cares. These kids don't care. But I went and I, trudged through the snow. And this boy Exalis comes running up to me. He's like, "You're back. I didn't think you were coming back. They never come back." And I thought, "Oh yeah, I'm back." And he's like, where do you go to school? Where were you? I told him I was home for break. I go to school. And he was like, "Where do you go to school?" And I told him, I said, "Where are you going to go to school?" And he looked at me and he laughed. He was 10 years old. And he's like, I'm not going to college. I'm not going to college. And that is when it hit me for the first time, right? What are the real differences? When I was 10 years old, my parents were asking me, "Are you going to Harvard or Yale?" I went to neither one of those, but that was the conversation, not if you go. And so it feels to me like what you're doing is showing kids possibilities and giving them a path.
100%.
They still have to walk into it, but there's a lot of kids that have the aptitude and have the ability. If they could just see the possibilities. Am I getting that right?
Oh my God, you're spot on. I should film what you're doing and put it in our website. Most of the times, for one, most people that live in poverty don't get out of poverty because there's so many obstacles.
Of course.
Education, financial systems, there's just things that are not geared towards helping that population for a lot of different reasons that people can justify, but they still hurt the population. You're born into it, right?
Sure.
But what's missing is usually there's not knowledge in the household or time. There might be knowledge and not time to help that kid the same way somebody else might have, like you and I are doing for our children. And so really what I did was I've industrialized with Think Big for Kids. The idea that you can care for a kid, show them a path, help them get an education. But of course they have to do all the work. They have to opt in. They've got to get the grades or they've got to apply to the things. So it's still up to them. But what we're doing is showing them the path that most of us that are living outside of poverty get to see on an everyday basis. We're getting to show to them weekly or monthly, depending on what they're doing. And we're seeing that the results are exactly what you'd expect. When they get the attention, they're the ones breaking through. They're the ones getting the jobs and having just a livable wage. If you look at the country, even though I totally agree with you, being in the United States is partly, if I lived in many, many of the other countries, I would have never come out of poverty. So the fact that we live in the US, we have all these opportunities. Obviously, as an entrepreneur, I'm super grateful for that. But at our size and our makeup, we have a lot of challenges for people to even just make a living. And so trying to figure out ways to help them that doesn't feel like a crutch, that becomes systemic for them. Teaching people how to fish, not giving them the fish, all those biblical kind of metaphors. And I think that's what we're doing, and we're seeing the results. So why not do that for more people that need it? It raises all communities, right? It's in your community where you see high poverty, you see high crime rates. Where you see high poverty, you see terrible infrastructure. You see terrible tax base, all of those things. So you can even just be selfish and say, I want my community to be better. And so this is a good thing to do, is to help kids in need to participate in the American dream part. So charity is almost the wrong word for it. I think we're doing economic development.
Absolutely. It's economic
Community development. Yeah,
Yep.
community development. And so, because we're not giving anybody anything that we all don't have, but just showing people the way to do it. And, it's some of our systems are complicated. Even like financial aid is so complicated for a kid. So everybody's like, oh, these kids get all kinds of loans and financial aid. Most of them don't. Most people, period, regardless of economics, don't know how to fill the forms out. For one, we're doing a podcast with Think Bigger Voices. And one of the ladies, it's probably going to be a boring podcast, but it's all about these forms
It's
and
so
how
great.
hard they are. Right. Because we want content to be out there for people to pull it up and say, I'm about to fill the form out. Here's an expert in the country that's going to help us figure it out.
Well, think
It's
about
stuff
SAT,
like that.
right? Like SAT, whole industries are created around consultants to help with SATs because the process is challenging, and we know that it's a rote repetition and training kind of thing, right? And so access to that becomes a big thing too. So a lot of the systems we have, when you talk about inherent systems,
Yeah.
but when you talk about like community, because it's not like it was you and your colleague that did all of this, right? It was then marshaling the resources of your community and a lot of businesses. So I am curious, like, what do you think the role of businesses and business leaders, are in, local or broader philanthropic community efforts?
No, it's a good question. And it could be political, and I'm not a political person, so I won't go there. But I think it's about humanity. Like, to me, it's about, like, you're only on Earth for a short amount of time. And so we all get to choose the time we spend on what we want to do, whether it's family or the community or whatever. But I think there's something very human about helping another person, whatever that is. It doesn't have to be kids. It can be an older person or somebody with a disability or whatever. And I just think it fulfills you. Like, I've always told people I am pretty selfish in what I do for Think Big, because I feel great about helping another person.
Sure.
And so that lights me up. And so I think most people would say we all have a responsibility to just being a good human being and carving out a little time or effort to make it a better place for other people and find that niche for you. Like I said earlier, when I was at Arthur Andersen, they did a good job of exposing you to different organizations to try to get you involved. And I kind of got hooked. I personally got hooked there. But I would say most people I run across, it's what you said earlier. They want to help, they just don't know how. So we make it easy for them and take these resources in each of the communities. I was telling you this before the broadcast. The irony is that so I started this with some friends in Tampa, Think Big for Kids, but I've had friends in other markets open up the other 5 markets. We're in 6 markets. We have some people that I competed, Jim Bowman, who I competed with every day as a Microsoft Dynamics partner back at TriBridge, calls me up, even though we were dead competitors. He goes, I'm retired. I sold my company. I want to do what you're doing in New Jersey. And we had a model that, we can give them resources and do kind of like a store opening, like a restaurant would. We have a thriving, Think Big business in New Jersey because of a guy that I competed with every day. And I've got Mike Batt in Virginia, in the Fairfax area, doing the same thing. And he was a partner at Microsoft. He worked with you at Microsoft. And this is a guy I worked with as a partner for 20 years. And he kind of had the same moment. Him and Amir Capri came to me and said, hey, we want to open this up in Fairfax. We live here. We've got a lot of people suffering. And so I think once they have and he saw the blueprint, it's like he opened the franchise, Think Big for Kids. And it's also doing very, very well. And so I do think that it's part of the human experience. And so you can't force it. Like I can't ever go to somebody and say, well, you really have to.
Oh, of course not. Yeah.
It's about really showing them the impact, really, and how it affects their kids or their family or their community. If you look at it through a wider lens than, hey, I'm just giving money, but I'm just making this a better place for all of us. And once you believe that, you have to believe it, then you'll start contributing time to something. And I don't know, I've been around a long time. I think 90% of the people I run into are wired that way. And there's definitely some people that are like, I'm just not interested in that. And I usually just don't spend a lot of time with them. They're just so anti. I've had some people say to me, I just don't believe in charity. And I'm like, okay, good talking to you, tell me why. And then they tell me, and I'm like, this is not going to be good. So I don't go there. I'm just like, I'm not going to get you there. I'm not trying to change your religion. I'm just trying to get you to participate.
Well, I'm with you. I believe that the majority of people would love to make an impact. What gets in the way? I think what gets in the way is and I'm guilty of this sometimes. Like where you're a leader, you're an aspiring leader, things are busy, you have a family, and then you say one day, either one day when I retire, I'll
Sure.
take this on, or one day when I have more time. Or I'd share with you, I wasn't going to say this, but I had a dream a couple of years ago of a whole business idea around helping kids in the local Charleston area. And it was cool. And I went on a walk with my husband and we talked about it. And have I done anything with it? Very little, right? Like there's when you got into that conference room and you took the experience you had and you turned it into fixing something. And I would just, maybe it's just a call to action to encourage some folks that are inspired by your story, just to think about what are some things that you're seeing locally that you could start to fix. And even if starting to fix it means, over the course of the next 6 months, I'm just going to have some conversations and learn more. It doesn't have to be a very rapid turnaround like you were able to do. Maybe that's just the encouragement for people to think about.
Jamie, I love that. I think it really is as simple as just start doing something. Like in your case, you don't have to start the company that did it. You just need to find one that's doing something close. Like Think Big for Kids, by the way, we could talk offline, and get involved in something that's kind of doing what you want. And then if you do that for a while and your time frees up, and I don't think everybody needs to start a foundation. I think it's just finding an hour a week to do something. And everybody can find that when you think about it in that lens. And then you'll either fall in love with it or you won't. Again, you typically find people are volunteers. They just fall in love with the kids. They're just like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. Like he wrote me this letter that instead of doing this, he drew a picture of the future and he drew me in there as the mentor or whatever. I'm just like, and it just, it really grabs them. So anyway,
well,
you are doing something.
Well,
You got
absolutely.
me on
Absolutely.
right.
Yeah.
Your dream got me on this pod. Thank God you would have never put me on the podcast. The dream did it. So you're doing something.
Thank you. Oh, I'm just going to declare right now that this is going to turn into something like really beautiful and amazing. You and I might not ever know what that is, but this conversation is going to spark somebody out there to do something. Only two more questions for you. But so I've read in the article that, of course, you're not going to stop where you are. There's always something more coming. And I read in the article that you are thinking about doing something called Think Bigger Productions. Is there any news that you can break on my podcast? Any things that you can share about what's coming down the pike? Sorry, I've been dying to ask you that all day.
No. It won't be breaking news, but we did launch a podcast called Think Bigger Voices. And so the production company basically launched the podcast. We've got 4 episodes live. I'm just copying your career, so I'm following your footsteps. And it's all about educating the public on poverty. Like, what are the obstacles? What are the solutions? It's beyond Think Big, although it uses Think Bigger Voices. And Jenny Trivey's the host. And we're going to have one every 2 weeks. So probably 24 a year. And, we're talking to students. We're talking to people all over the country. We've filmed in Atlanta so far, Tallahassee, Virginia. I think New Jersey's coming up, and of course Tampa as well. And just finding out what the challenges are. So we've had bank presidents on talking about the banking system. We've had somebody that runs a food bank talking about food scarcity. We've had somebody who runs an art education institution, how kids that are living in poverty using art to further there's jobs there that people aren't thinking about, like managing acts and things that are not just about the artist, but the business around the artist.
Love it.
We've had somebody that runs a teacher of the year that runs this little closet for kids to just come and get whatever they need, from a razor blade to toilet paper to food or whatever. And she started with this little closet, been doing it for like 30 years. And how do you encourage other teachers to do that? And so it's both about the problem and awareness, but also about some of the solutions that are out there. So it's called Think Bigger Voices, and it's on all the, Apple, Google, all the places where podcasts are.
Excellent. I'm going to link to that in the show notes. And I would encourage anybody who just wants to get some inspiration, motivation, learn more about this topic, to go listen. I did actually listen to 2 of them. I think the Boys and Girls Club president, loved his story.
Oh, Freddie Williams.
Oh, he's fantastic. Awesome. So, yeah. All right, Tony. Well, I want to be respectful. That hour flew, by the way, for me anyway. Awesome. You have just created so much value in the marketplace for individuals, for families. So just amazing. I'm honored to know you and to be your friend. If you could leave us, though, I ask everybody the last question, by giving us just one piece of advice about leadership through all of your experiences, what would that be?
Yeah, the thing somewhere in my mid to late 30s, and maybe because I'm a male and it took me a long time to get there, I never realized how much empathy played a role in leadership. Like I'm a hard driver, or at least perceive myself to be a hard driver and have really high expectations and set the bar high, which I know you've worked with many people like that at Microsoft. But what I learned along the way at TriBridge was the empathy and really understanding people. And sometimes you can be hard driving and you're catching somebody at the wrong day. Somebody passed in their family, there's sickness or children or whatever is going on, and learning to listen and see that and respond to that and creating some balance. And that, I think it's, I had the board challenge me, not on the word empathy, but the culture of TriBridge. And, we never had a quarter where we didn't make money. We never had a quarter where we're not growing. Like it really was a magical success story. And it was all about the culture. And I think empathy is at the center of it. And I don't even mean it in a negative way. I'm just like understanding that there's a human on the other end of this and that something else could be going on, good or bad, right? And how to, respect and love that person in a way that makes them feel both respected and also important, just changes the dynamic of being a leader. And so it's not about being liked. That's what I've tried to explain to different people. It's not about being popular or liked. It's about caring, and that's different. And I think when you do that, people will do extraordinary things. I would argue at all the organizations I've been a part of, from Anderson to TriBridge to Appspace to A-Line to Think Big, whatever, the teams that have performed well are not where you had all the stars. The teams that were teams. I think business is a team sport. I played team sports my whole life. I think it's a team sport. And I think when you get caring going on, and it could be caring for the work product, caring for the customer, caring for the shareholder, caring for each other, which is at the base of it, then you have the best performance. So I actually think if you want to be a great leader, I think creating empathy and trying to understand and care for your team will just be something for at least men. Men are just less that way, I think, early on. It's maybe viewed as a weakness, kind of a macho, kind of an old thing. And I think what I learned was, man, that's a superpower. And I liked it. Like I didn't know. I didn't even, like, it was hard too. Like I cried a lot more at TriBridge than I expected to, because you start learning of other people's hardships and you're like, holy cow, how's this person getting to work every day? And how can I help that? And then you can sometimes. And then you have a incredible connection with the organization and the teams that way. And we had that at TriBridge and we have that at Appspace. So I really encourage people to let that happen. You can't force it.
No, but let that in. Yeah.
Let that in. Open up. Yeah. So
Tony, thank you so much. I didn't expect you to say that per se, but what a beautiful reflection. No, I mean that in a positive way, right?
No, I'll take it positive.
To end us with like a reflection, and I hope my listeners are thinking, okay, where does empathy play a role in my leadership? And am I letting that in? And where are the connections? And not just because it's the right thing to do. I mean, that's really like, I swear, the older I get, the more I think everything I needed to learn about being successful in this life, I learned before I was 5 years old by the things that my mom taught me. Be kind to people and be caring and everything.
Sure.
And to your point, it drives business results too. You get the best out of people, you get the best for your business, and you create an environment that creates a legacy. I know the TriBridge people, we still call them TriBridge people, even though TriBridge doesn't exist anymore because you sold it to another company. They still consider themselves TriBridge people. I mean, you still hear that, right? It's because of what you're describing. All right, Tony, thank you so much. I'm so excited to get reconnected with you, and I'll be talking to you soon about getting moving on some ideas that are popping for me as we talk today. So thank you.
I love it. Jamie, good luck with the podcast. Thank you for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Great to see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Join us every Tuesday for insider access to executive leadership.